The brilliant investigative journalist John Solomon was interviewed by Benny Johnson, whose channel has grown over the past few years. Until recent months, I would even say up to 6 million viewers on YouTube alone.
Your article, which analyzes all the explosive details, is found in this new statement from the administration. You call it a boomerang because we wouldn't have these documents if James Comey hadn't thrown a fit.
That's right. Yeah, listen, he tried to play the victim. I'm a victim. I'm being persecuted only because Donald Trump hates me. And Donald Trump does hate him, there's no doubt about that. He made that clear, but that's not why he was indicted. He's being indicted because his own emails, his own messages, his own handwritten notes show that his testimony to Congress doesn't match the contemporary evidence in his files. There are 5 revelations, so it's easy to break down.
James Comey, with a weeping look, with a weeping face, went on all the television channels and told everyone there sobbing that he was a victim of the fascist Trump who was taking revenge on him for the truth. Well, it turned out, well, not quite like that.
The first thing is, that's not the most ironic part. This is James Comey writing from his personal email address to a government official conducting FBI business about working with the media, manipulating information about his investigation into Hillary Clinton, who was using her personal email for government affairs. The irony in James Comey's arrogance is impossible to miss. I'm going to investigate her, clear her, but I'll use my personal email to hide it. That really stands out. That's the first thing we do. Now we know for sure. Second, he fully expected to work for President-elect Clinton after the November 16 election. He expected that she would be satisfied with how he handled her email case. In other words, he was sucking up to his boss in advance. He just miscalculated because Donald Trump won the election. Third, you can clearly see how he manages Anil Richmond, his longtime friend and at that time a special government employee of the FBI, clearly approving the anonymous contacts with the media that he has, especially with the New York Times.
I want to clarify that Comey and the others were so sure that they had closed off all paths for Trump to win. I'm talking about 2016, they didn't even try to hide it. And everything that should have been hidden, they wrote to each other in private messages. And then they decided that they would erase everything and hide it all.
That's the problem. Because Comey testified both in 2017 and in 2020 that he did not approve any anonymous leaks or anonymous contacts with the media. His emails show this. He writes, "Good job, my friend," after Daniel Richmond repeats what he told the New York Times. Or later he writes something like, "Maybe you can make this guy smarter," meaning the New York Times reporter, you can convince him to write something a little different. He authorized media leaks and contacts with the New York Times about the Hillary Clinton case, which he denied.
Comey managed to direct the actions of his friend, to whom he gave a bunch of secret materials to leak. Disclosures.
Well, he's just a wonderful little rascal, our mischievous boy. Then you have the fourth element, which is that his handwritten notes seem to show that James Comey knew about Clinton's intelligence plan, that interception that John Brennan tells everyone about, including Barack Obama, that Hillary Clinton planned to falsely label Donald Trump's campaign as Russian at the end of the 2016 election. This matters because Comey claimed ignorance when questioned about it in the Senate.
It's like laying out the entire crime plan, posting it on the internet, and then after committing the crime saying, "I had no idea about it, not the slightest idea." And this man was in charge of the FBI. Can you imagine what kind of idiots worked under his leadership? Bosses don't like subordinates who are smarter than themselves. They don't like it.
His notes suggest he knew specific details about this. All this evidence is found in items like the sieve and the destruction bag. It seems like someone tried to make these documents disappear. By the way, that would be a modern crime if the goal was obstruction. We need to learn a lot more before we can make really good assessments. Because you could have burned the documents, but they might have been saved in the FBI's electronic system. We don't know yet, but of course there are hints in yesterday's document that perhaps there was a cover-up, and that other people might have been responsible. If you're hiding something in the skiff, that's a problem. SCIFs typically have video surveillance and access codes, so it's generally known who enters and who brings or removes packages for burning. If it was a crime, it should be treated as one.
The father is whipping his son with a belt and saying, "I'm not beating you for playing, but for trying to win back your losses." The majority? Punishment, actually. Not for what a person has done, I mean what's called white collar, so to speak, white collar workers, not for what they've done. Often it's something trivial, but for hiding it later, covering it up, lying, and turning something trivial into a real crime.
John, my question is, will this lead to new charges for James Comey? Could this potentially become evidence presented in a major conspiracy that's been formed?
Yes, great question.
The grand jury in Florida.
Yes, so it's possible. All right, especially if they can prove that people were at Steve's trying to get rid of evidence. Before Kash Patel and Donald Trump took over, this could have been another charge. Did Comey talk to those who later did this? Like, why? Why were Comey's handwritten notes there and not given to the Senate or the House of Representatives years ago? This revelation raises more questions about whether Comey obstructed, suggesting possible additional charges. Now that it has become known that he had these handwritten notes, and he seemed to know about it, I conducted some investigations. Last night, Lindsay Halligan tried to add this as a third charge against Comey, but failed. The grand jury did not indict. Now there may be new evidence that could allow them to go back and bring this charge again. They attempted to add it as a third charge in this case, but failed. But that doesn't mean that new evidence and new testimony won't lead to this. Then, do you remember the recent report we did? We know that James Bankert told Postal Comey that he was allowed to leak classified information. Not about Hillary Clinton, not about Donald Trump, but about another case under the Espionage Act, the leak of which happened at the end of 2016. We believe there's a 10-year statute of limitations, so it could be added later. So there are hints that Colligan and Kash Patel's team might bring additional charges based on the evidence we're seeing now.
As Gorbachev used to say, the main thing is to start. And it started pouring out like from a leaky bucket. Just one leak, which is classified as secret information, can get you 10 years in prison. And altogether, who knows, maybe 300 years.
What were they doing, not providing this evidence to the public? In particular, and I'd like to show this on the screen, I know this is in the form of, so to speak, a handwritten note from James Comey, but we did our best to decipher it. John, I know you and your team are world experts in this. That's the main point. The date indicates that they were preparing in advance to drop this on President Trump as an October surprise. Is that John Brennan? Is that John Brennan, or is that Joe Biden? Right here, John.
I think John Brennan is John Brennan since he told everyone about Clinton's plan. We know this from other recently released documents, so the current opinion of the FBI staff is that this is a reference to John Brennan. Was John Brennan at that meeting informing Comey, or is he being briefed about what John Brennan told the FBI? We don't know. But this fits the time frame when the FBI was thoroughly briefed by the CIA about this plan. Clinton.
So, undermine Hillary, Rodham, Clinton, and then, in the end, kind of consolidate with the Hillary Rodham system. Clinton planned to tie all this to Trump. Hillary Rodham, Clinton health. I think we know part of this. John, but could you help us interpret and decipher?
Yes, again, only James Comey can tell us what he really meant in those notes. Those who have read them and best understand the evidence believe that's what's happening here. The fact that the FBI is looking at this intercept differently than the intelligence community did. Right? So, hey, Hillary Clinton, the Russians were caught plotting this thing. We should realize that taking this path could be a political dirty trick. Professional intelligence officers thought the same and warned President Obama in July 2016. They first warned top intelligence leaders in August, and the FBI got more detailed info in September. The FBI looks at this from a perspective favorable to Hillary Clinton, like, the Russians are going to harm Hillary Clinton by spreading this information. Think about how stupid that is. They're more worried this could embarrass Hillary Clinton if the Russians reveal it, than concerned the plan might be corrupting the FBI and intelligence community. It gives you some insight into how James Comey and his team were thinking. They weren't thinking about the American people. They were thinking about how to present it so that the bad old Russians would hurt Hillary Clinton, in her own words.
How is this connected to Obama, to Obama's infamous meeting where Joe Biden was present and where allegedly they targeted General Flynn and where they talked about accelerating Russiagate?
Yes, so I think this is where you start to look at the bigger conspiracy. They discover Hillary's planned dirty trick, but start the investigation anyway, obtaining a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant under false pretenses. This all happens before the election. Then, after Donald Trump surprisingly wins, to James Comey's shock. Why do I say that? Because in James Comey's own email, he says he expected to work for President-elect Clinton. So it must have been a shock for him that Donald Trump is now in office. Now they're looking for a way to prevent Donald Trump's presidency from starting. So the first obstacle comes up in December, when John Brennan rejects the experts at the CIA and elsewhere who want to claim that Vladimir Putin didn't have a favored candidate in the election. He was just creating the usual chaos that the Russians always stir up during elections to make Americans doubt their own system.
Russia has always interfered in elections, but not on the side of any one candidate, rather to create this kind of anti-democratic confusion in the minds of young people. That's the standard procedure. This time, in 2016, the Kremlin didn't promote anyone either. But having evidence that Hillary is, first of all, a drug addict, second, an alcoholic, and there is definite confirmation of this. They had uncontrollable fits of rage. They didn't publish it, well, apparently not wanting Trump to win. Well, and maybe to later blackmail Clinton, the White House, and so on.
But John Brennan and James Comey are the two driving forces behind this intelligence assessment, and they are changing the intelligence community's assessment. The career officials had good reason to claim or think Vladimir Putin lacked a preferred candidate. Why? Because in October 2016, when most people were making decisions, Vladimir Putin stopped his active measures in the election. He stopped his usual actions and wasn't interfering with either side then. When could he have helped his favorite candidate the most? Therefore, CIA officers had reason to believe Vladimir Putin was not trying to help Donald Trump. But that doesn't matter to Brennan or Comey. They seized it, canceled the old conclusion, started a new one, and excluded most other intelligence agencies since they wouldn't sign off. And they issue a fake conclusion that comes out in early January, saying that Vladimir Putin tried to help Donald Trump. And when this comes out, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, Biden, Barack Obama, and Comey and others are at a meeting with the president on January 5, 2017. They're trying to figure out how to get rid of Mike Flynn, who had already been cleared by the FBI. The FBI had recommended closing their investigation into Mike Flynn because they didn't believe that the future national security advisor had done anything wrong. But that doesn't matter to Barack Obama, Joe Biden, or others. They come up with ways to get rid of this person at the beginning of the presidency and to hurt Donald Trump even more.
Am I some kind of founding father? Well, they weren't angels either, of course. Even Lenin wasn't an angel. They couldn't even imagine it. To weaken the elected president so that he couldn't effectively govern the country. I think they couldn't even imagine something like that. Maybe 100 years ago or even 50, I suspect. In other words, they did all sorts of nasty things to each other. But to weaken the presidency, just to weaken the country, to make people's lives worse, I don't know. Yeah. So, to make the country suffer so much, to make the country hate Trump that much. And by the way, they succeeded with 50% of the population. They managed to do it. They achieved it. They brought half the country to such a state of hatred toward Trump that this part of the population wanted things to be bad for themselves, their children, and their families. As long as Trump was removed. That's how the Trump hatred syndrome was born, or more precisely, that's how it was created.
It wasn't only a dirty campaign trick, now it's an attempt to interfere with the presidency and top government officials. Barack Obama, James Comey, John Brennan, and Joe Biden are all brainstorming. Records show Joe Biden suggested using the Logan Act, though it wasn't seen as realistic. One of the FBI agents familiar with that meeting wrote in his notes afterward, "What is our mission here? Is it to find out the truth, or to try to catch Mike Flynn in a lie so we can go after him?" Even the participants felt uncomfortable about what was happening at that meeting. That's when you start to see a bigger conspiracy, not only to overturn the American people's will before the election, but also to undermine their legitimately elected president with false labels at the start.
Gentlemen, those who demand faster, 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 faster. So, to act rashly without having all these documents, which are being hidden and destroyed. The main thing is, Pikes, if you don't have all this, if you don't prepare everything, they can slip off the hooks or break out of the nets. Everything must be methodical, by the letter of the law, with all the evidence, so they don't get away.
John, I know we're here to talk about James Comey, and I know you've done such extraordinary work at Just the News. But if you don't mind, can we take a little detour to John Brennan, who's been publicly roaming around Washington, going into subway stations like an aggressive homeless person, yelling at people, getting into fights, making a complete fool of himself. And there are several videos where he's poking someone in the chest, accusing them of lying. Regarding the 51 experts on Hunter Biden's laptop. He gets into arguments with people during Q&A sessions. Yes, he lies to journalists at subway stations. There's a series of what kids would call John Brennan's meltdowns happening all over Washington. What's going on? You found John Brennan sleeping under a pile of newspapers at your local bus stop.
I didn't find him. He's mostly with lawyers, likely working with them to prepare for possible charges because of Jim Jordan. The House Judiciary Committee sent a rather detailed and carefully written criminal referral, which really lays out a real criminal case against him. Now the grand jury still has to consider it, and the prosecutors still have to evaluate it. But he feels the pressure, and I think he feels two kinds of pressure. One of them is that he might have to go through a criminal process and spend a lot of money on lawyers, like all those people who falsely went through those investigations during the Russia collusion case, which he and Comey helped create, like a mirage. But there's a second part to this. John Brennan really cares about his legacy as an intelligence leader at the CIA, and that intelligence legacy is being tarnished more and more every day. Now we know that he and Mike Morell were involved in falsely convincing Americans not to believe in Hunter Biden's laptop, when in fact it was real evidence that was already in the possession of the FBI and had been verified. He is now being exposed as someone who altered the intelligence community's findings to falsely make the American public believe that Donald Trump was a puppet of Vladimir Putin when there was no evidence for that. John Durham reached this conclusion under the Joe Biden administration. It's important to remind people this happened during Biden's administration, and he is the person who apparently knew before the election that Hillary Clinton was going to play this dirty trick on Donald Trump, and he doesn't stop. That's right. Pont, Barack Obama, and James Comey support this. They get Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrants and make it look that way. Now, to be fair, the people under John Brennan kept raising the alarm. They warned the FBI about Steele, but James Comey wasn't going to listen, and neither was his team. They kept moving forward. I think the legacy of a man who built his entire career to be at the top of the intelligence hierarchy can now be exposed as someone who ruined that intelligence hierarchy. That's putting a lot of pressure on him. People who know and see him say it's a defensive process.
They're talking about CIA Director Brennan, who once, back in the days of Ronald Reagan, voted for the communists. And now he goes around giving speeches, making money at retirement homes and all sorts of clubs, where he starts yelling at people who ask him uncomfortable questions. He's also very smart, just like Comey. Or maybe he's a psycho, which, by the way, could be even worse. Just take a look.
Not very good for someone who's in charge of the most powerful intelligence agency in the world, as many would say. It seems like he's really breaking down here. What do you think about this behavior?
One of the things that I think President Trump could do as a great service to the country, I think he should declassify the president and release the interview of John Brennan with SSAE John Durham. It was a long, detailed interview. I'm sure there's a lot of classified information in it, but I would like to know what John Brennan admitted behind closed doors. I think the public would benefit from that. I also think we need to find out if John Durham was allowed to interview one of Brennan's successors, Gina Haspel. I don't see any mention of Durham interviewing Gina Haspel. Did someone like Bill Barr or Joe Biden prevent Gina Haspel from giving a direct interview to John Durham? I think these are two things that President Trump could give to the American public. That would open up completely new revelations and a new understanding of what was happening in the intelligence community and who was being protected. Because, honestly, all this evidence that we're getting now, Benny, was available for Bill Barr and John Durham and others to make public. They didn't do it before the 2000 elections. We need to know why that happened and why we lacked transparency. Before voters went to the polls in 2020, it took us until 2025, 3 presidential elections later, to find out what really happened in 2016 at the beginning of Trump's first presidency. I think that's unacceptable to most people in the American public.
I agree, it is. This should not go unpunished. We have to know what they were doing behind our backs and why and by whom it was being hidden.
You know what this says to the American people? It really says something. Especially this obsequiousness and ugliness, like, I'm sure President-elect Hillary will appreciate my actions here. It really confirms that every time President Trump claimed that the deep state rigged the election against him, he was right. And that these agencies, the most powerful agencies, intelligence agencies on Earth, were used to manipulate and try to return power to bureaucratic Washington from the hands of the American people, who had imposed a populist candidate, Donald Trump, to lead the nation. There is no other way to interpret this. But John, you're the expert.
Keep in mind that what we've uncovered from 2016 to 2024 is what the Democratic Party and its sponsors want to make the norm in America. And by the way, this is extremely abnormal for the American experience. Since 2015 and 2016, we've never seen institutions like the FBI, CIA, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and others act in this way. We didn't have FBI directors trying to influence the course of elections, and this started in 2016. And, you know, many people on the left and some of my colleagues said that this was an anomaly. As soon as Comey left, it didn't happen again. The truth is, under Christopher Wray, it got worse. It kept festering under Wray. Recently, I had a great story. In late fall 2020, the FBI got 2 pieces of information. One of them was reliable intelligence that China might be trying to send fake ballots by mail. They shut down the investigation to help Joe Biden win the election. At the same time this was happening, the Washington field office of the FBI was trying to review all reports on Donald Trump's campaign financing, trying to find something to investigate. And 2 weeks before Election Day, they say, oh God, we found a guy who worked as a contractor, he got paid, and he went gambling. We should look into this. Maybe there was a crime there, someone taking their paycheck to go gambling. You can debate if it was wise, but it doesn't seem criminal. They investigated this in the last 2 weeks before the election. So does that mean ignoring Democrats like Hillary Clinton while targeting Trump, even with weak evidence? This modus operandi continued in 2020, but now the American people have interrupted it in 2024. But you know what? If they don't vote that way and keep dealing with these issues, those who did this, the next generation of them will come back and they'll ruin this American system even more. Our votes matter more than ever when you start choosing between an America that uses weapons and one that tells the truth. The American people must choose which to live in.
Amen to that. If you like this video and you want more quality content, hit the bell and share it. Meetings. That's all. Until we meet again.